623, 14 November 2020. This is number 3. This should get everybody's blood boiling. It should. From Zero Hedge. Outgoing Syria envoy boasts that he hid the true troop levels and stymied Trump's withdrawal efforts. Let me read that again. Outgoing Syria envoy boasts that he hid the true U.S. troop levels and stymied President Trump's withdrawal efforts. Among the first of top officials to exit their posts, even as votes were being counted, was Ambassador James Jeffrey, who had been appointed by President Trump as Special Representative for Syria Engagement and Special Envoy to the Global Coalition to Defeat Islamic State since August 2018. Jeffrey has in the past been criticized as being too pro-Turkish and is seen as a Syria hawk, being among past foremost voices desiring regime change in Syria. Pro-Kurdish lobbying groups further see him as too much in Erdogan's pocket. Jeffrey, it should be noted, had briefly served as George W. Bush's Deputy National Security Advisor, as well as at times acting National Security Advisor from 2007 to 2008. Jeffrey announced his retirement last Sunday and is already openly boasting about how he hid the true numbers of U.S. troops inside Syria from the White House. He further described in a fresh interview with Defense One that when in December 2018 President Trump ordered a full and immediate Syria withdrawal, he and his team successfully stymied the efforts to get the U.S. military out of Syria. Here's what he told Defense One, quote, "We were always playing shell games to not make clear to our leadership how many troops we had there," Jeffrey said in an interview. "The actual number of troops in northeast Syria is, quote, a lot more than, end quote, the roughly 200 troops Trump initially agreed to leave there in 2018. It's now widely believed that there's anywhere between 800 and 2,000 American personnel in northeast Syria, though these commonly cited numbers could also be part of the shell game to mislead both Washington leadership and the public." Jeffrey described Trump's attempts to pull troops out of Syria as the most controversial thing, quote, "as the most controversial thing in my 50 years in government," end quote, and as a policy directive which had to be thwarted. Hence, he played a shell game with troop numbers while convincing the administration to continue the occupation. Again, the career diplomat boasts about he and others actively thwarted the commander-in-chief. Quote, "For Jeffrey, the incident was far less cut and dry, but it is ultimately a success story that ended with U.S. troops still operating in Syria, denying Russian and Syrian territorial gains and preventing ISIS remnants from reconstituting." In 2018 and again in October 2019, when Trump repeated the withdrawal order, the president boasted that ISIS was defeated, but each time the president was convinced to leave a residual force in Syria and the fight continued. Quote, "What Syria withdrawal? There was never a Syria withdrawal," end quote, Jeffrey said. Quote, "When the situation in northeast Syria had been fairly stable after we defeated ISIS, Trump was inclined to pull out. In each case, we then decided to come up with 5 better arguments for why we needed to stay, and we succeeded both times. That's the story," end quote. This is also a man who 4 years ago signed the now infamous Never Trump letter, which had dubbed then presidential candidate Donald Trump as a danger to America, Defense Post reminds the reader. While Trump has in the end kept mostly special forces troops in the Deir ez-Zor and al-Hasaka provinces ostensibly to secure the oil, quote unquote, or rather to prevent it from being accessed by either the Assad government or Russia while crippling sanctions remain on Damascus, he apparently did shut down the CIA program to covertly oust Assad, known as Timber Sycamore, in 2017. But, as they've documented on multiple occasions, every time Trump signaled he was ready to pull forces out of Syria, deep state elements which make up Washington's foreign policy establishment fought him at every turn. The Washington Post Beirut bureau chief is positively gleeful about this. Quote, U.S. officials have been lying to Trump and the American people about the true number of U.S. troops in Syria in order to deter him from withdrawing them. End quote, Washington Post's Liz Sly commented. That's one to chew on. Lastly, from the American Wire. An Indiana woman was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison for smuggling tens of thousands of dollars worth of cash and gold from the U.S. to support ISIS, the Department of Justice announced this past Monday. Samantha Marie El-Hassani, formerly Samantha Sally, was sentenced to 78 months in prison and 3 years of supervised release, according to the Department of Justice. El-Hassani pleaded guilty to financially supporting terrorism, the DOJ announced. El-Hassani admitted, quote, as El-Hassani admitted, she made multiple trips to Hong Kong to smuggle tens of thousands in cash and gold, knowing that the funds would be used to support ISIS in Syria. What a good little Democrat. Assistant General for National Security John Demers said in a press release. El-Hassani melted down the gold to look like jewelry and failed to declare the cash to customs officials, according to the DOJ. El-Hassani's husband and brother-in-law discussed traveling to Syria to join ISIS in November 2014, according to the DOJ. She helped the men by transporting over $30,000 in cash and gold to a safe deposit box in China so that the men could financially support ISIS. El-Hassani took her 7-year-old son and 2-year-old daughter through Istanbul, Turkey, to an ISIS-controlled area of Syria around June of 2015, according to the DOJ. She acquired rifle scopes, image-stabilized binoculars, and other tactical gear in Hong Kong before their trip to Syria. El-Hassani and her children were taken into U.S. law enforcement custody from the Syrian Democratic Forces in July 2018, according to the DOJ. So, there you have it. All right, 623 out.